My boss fired me for being too traditional, but his face went completely blank when I walked back in as his replacement. What happens next will leave you speechless. Derek, we've decided to move in a different direction. Those were the first words he said. No good morning. No seat offered. Just that. The moment hung in the air like dust after demolition. Silent, drifting, final. I stood there, folder still in my hand, unsure whether to sit or stay standing. Jordan didn't look up. He was flicking through something on his tablet, tapping like he had more important tasks to finish than firing a man who'd given 12 years of his life to this place. The blinds were half open, slanting stripes of sunlight across his modern steel desk. It looked colder than usual in there. Or maybe it was me. I stared at the screen he was absorbed in, wondering if it had my name on it. Probably not. He didn't even bother to make eye contact until he reached the second sentence. You're a good guy, he said, and this time he glanced up. But your approach, it's a little too traditional. Too slow. Not exactly what we're building here. His tone was calm, practiced, like he'd rehearsed it in front of the mirror that morning, maybe even tried out different phrasings. His suit was crisp, no wrinkles, a dark blue tailored thing that cost more than a month's rent. His tie had that perfect triangular knot, like nothing in his life ever came undone. Mine, on the other hand, had a thread loose near the collar. I'd noticed it when I parked that morning. Funny the things that stand out when your world begins to tilt. I blinked. Just once. Not out of surprise, I'd felt a chill the past few weeks. Meetings rescheduled. Jordan growing distant. Whispers between project leads when I entered the room. Still, hearing it aloud, it felt like something under my ribs had shifted, like a step had given out beneath my feet. But I didn't flinch. Didn't ask why, or try to defend myself. I'd seen men do that. Plead, protest, beg. It never changed the outcome. It just gave the other guy more control. I nodded slowly, controlled. My fingers tightened slightly on the folder. A small twitch, barely visible, but I felt it. He kept going, spinning his tablet around like he was presenting a slideshow. HR's finalized everything. They'll walk you through the exit process. Your badge will deactivate by 5. His smile was soft now, like a pat on the back from a doctor before a hard diagnosis. You'll land on your feet. I set the folder down on his desk, sliding it toward him without a word. The reports he'd asked for. They were finished, detailed, thorough. Just like everything I'd done under his leadership. He took them without looking. Didn't even thank me. I turned and walked out. The hallway felt longer than usual. Glass offices on either side, filled with people who'd once been teammates, some even friends. But no one said a word. They saw me. Some nodded slightly. One guy, Mitch from strategy, looked away the moment our eyes met. I kept walking. Past the conference room I used to run every Monday morning. Past the framed poster of innovation through execution. I'd written a proposal for years ago. No footsteps followed mine. Just silence and keyboard clicks behind the glass. I reached my desk. No personal photos. No coffee mug with my name. I'd always been careful about that. 12 years, and not a single thing there had my fingerprint. I packed the few things I needed. My notebook, a thumb drive, and a weathered leather planner I still use despite the digital age. A few engineers looked up as I walked out. One of them, Jalen, opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, but didn't. I gave him a slight nod, not to reassure him, just to say, I see you. The elevator ride down was quiet. A soft tune played through the speakers, something forgettable. I watched the numbers count down. 12, 11, 10. I expected something. Regret, maybe, or even panic. But there was just stillness, like my body had gone into another mode, one where every second was being recorded and filed for later. In the parking lot, I sat in the driver's seat of my old gray sedan, engine off, windows halfway down. The wind was cool, but it couldn't cool the heat building inside my chest. Not fire, something worse. Something slow. A pressure that sat heavy behind the ribs. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't look at it. I knew the messages would be from people I used to trust. Cowards wearing concern like perfume. Too afraid to speak up, too comfortable to care. I watched the front entrance of the building through the windshield. Jordan didn't come out. He wouldn't. He was probably back on his tablet already, calling the next person in, planning the next move. He didn't just fire me. He erased me. And he thought I would disappear quietly. I drove home with the radio off. No sound. Just the hum of tires and the quiet drum of thoughts in my head. My hands were steady on the wheel. I wasn't lost. I was beginning to see the road clearly for the first time. That night, I didn't turn on the lights. I poured a glass of scotch in the dark and sat by the window, staring out at the city. A city I had helped build in my own small way. A city that didn't know my name. That's when I reached for my notebook. Not the planner, the other one. The black one with the stitched spine. I opened it to a blank page and started writing. I wrote his name at the top, Jordan Keats. Then I started a list. Not of people to blame. Of facts, systems, departments, mistakes I'd noticed but never spoken about. Meetings that didn't add up. Vendors that billed double. Promotions that skipped better men. All the things I'd stored quietly in the back of my mind, thinking they didn't matter. And as I wrote, pieces clicked together. Not just about the firing. About the company. About why it had happened now. About who stood to gain. My approach wasn't too traditional. That was the excuse. I was let go because I asked too many questions. Because I didn't play the new game. Because I saw things I wasn't supposed to see. And remembered them. I kept writing until the bottle was half gone. I wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't confused. I was awake. And in the silence of that room, I made myself a promise. Not to get even. But to understand. Fully. Deeply. Until there was no doubt left. Because he hadn't just let me go. He wasn't just letting me go. He was removing me. There was a difference. And I would find out what that difference was. A week passed. Not quickly. Not easily. I didn't rush to find work or send out resumes. I wasn't trying to bounce back. I was trying to stand still long enough to hear what the silence had to say. Every morning, I walked the same loop through my old neighborhood. Past the faded library steps where I used to wait for the bus. Past the diner with the cracked window that served burnt coffee and didn't ask questions. I sat there most mornings, tucked into a booth with chipped red leather, eating plain eggs and dry toast. Alone. No tie. No name tag. No purpose anyone could see. It helped. The slowness of it all. The distance. I didn't want pity. I wanted clarity. And in that stillness, a strange thing happened. I began to remember. In the afternoons, I returned to my apartment and pulled out the storage bins I'd packed from my desk over the years. Reports, meeting notes, old emails printed on paper just in case. I'd always been a paper man. People joked about it, called me old school. The filing cabinet. But now, those dusty folders were my archive. My truth. I laid them out on the floor in rows, organized by department, date, and topic. I pored over them the way a detective might study a cold case. Not looking for closure. Looking for a crack. I didn't find it right away. What I found first were odd details I'd forgotten. Receipts from consulting firms I never worked with. Budget sign-offs with Jordan's signature dated on weekends. I froze when I saw one in particular. It was an approval for a vendor contract totaling $425,000. Signed with Jordan's bold blue ink. The problem was, I remembered him denying ever seeing that invoice when I flagged it last year. Never crossed my desk, he'd said, tapping the table with his ring finger. But here it was. Not just crossed. Signed. I began to scan every page with sharper eyes. My notebook filled again. Names. Sums. Repetition of terms like pilot phase, off-books, and private rollout. Certain vendors kept popping up. Tech development firms with no websites. Logistics contractors with no real addresses. On paper, it looked like expansion. But in truth, it was fog, layers of paperwork meant to confuse anyone who dared track the money. And I had once helped create those systems. Not for corruption, but for speed. Efficiency. I hadn't realized how easily those same systems could be turned into smoke. The memories came in waves. Like the time I questioned a line item on a budget review call. An extra $90,000 for data redundancy. Jordan had leaned forward, smiling, and said, "Let it go, Derek. It's covered." Covered. I thought he meant the budget. Now I saw it differently. Now it sounded like a warning. The worst part was, I had let it go. Again and again. Because I trusted him. Because I believed in the company. Because I thought if I worked hard enough, the truth would stay clean on its own. But men like Jordan knew better. They didn't clean the truth. They buried it. One night, unable to sleep, I opened my email archives. I'd saved backups, old conversations, reports, schedules. I began to search keywords. Consultant, prototype, nephew. That's when I found it. An onboarding document sent to HR 6 months ago, confirming a 6-figure role for a man named Bradley Keats.
No LinkedIn. No qualifications.
Just a surname that matched Jordan's and an address 2 blocks from his own. I checked the project he was assigned to. App development support. I'd never met Bradley. Never heard of him in any meeting. But he was listed as a team lead. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking, and felt the floor beneath my understanding shift again. This wasn't favoritism. It was theft camouflaged as innovation. I printed the email, highlighted it, and slid it into a new folder, Personal Connections. That was the beginning. From there, I worked quietly. A few emails to old contacts, conversations over coffee with people who owed me nothing, but still remembered the way I treated them. Like Eli, a soft-spoken analyst from accounting, now freelancing. I met him at a park bench one cloudy afternoon. I didn't ask him to betray anyone, just asked questions. "Do you remember those routing numbers from last fall?" I said, pretending to scroll my phone.
Eli hesitated.
"Jordan's project accounts?" I nodded. He looked around. They didn't make sense. That's all I'll say. Multiple transfers. Same day. Same vendors. I leaned back. "Thanks. That's enough." He handed me a napkin before leaving. Folded, pressed. Inside, 3 account numbers. I didn't open it until I was alone. Another thread. I reached out to Thomas, an intern from years ago, now working in compliance for a mid-tier firm. We met at a corner cafe. He looked surprised to see me. "Didn't know you were out," he said, lowering his voice. "I'm not out," I said. "I'm looking deeper in. I didn't ask for files. Just verification." He nodded at a few names I gave him, then paused at one, Valence Tech Solutions. "Yeah, that one's flagged in 2 systems," he said. "Doesn't pass basic audit thresholds." I nodded. Figured. My folder grew. Screenshots, paper trails, whispers becoming lines, lines becoming patterns. The most jarring moment came when I drove 2 hours to a warehouse listed in our internal assets as a server redundancy facility. It was raining when I arrived. I walked around the back lot, gravel crunching under my boots. There were no loading docks, no signs, just one rusted door and a window smeared with dust. I knocked. No answer. I called the contact number listed in the report. Disconnected. I tried the door. It was unlocked. Inside it was empty. No lights, no servers, no wiring. Just silence and a single folding chair in the middle of the room, as if someone once sat there waiting for a lie to come true. I stood there for a long time, listening. The sound of rain on the roof above felt louder now. More real than the fake infrastructure I just walked through. This wasn't just corruption. It was orchestration. Jordan had crafted a perfect illusion. One meant to impress investors, keep audits away, and distract employees with just enough movement to suggest growth. But it was hollow, fragile, and now I had seen behind the curtain. I drove back with the heater off, windows cracked just enough to keep me awake. My mind was alive, not with revenge but with clarity. I wasn't just a former employee anymore. I was a witness, and more than that, I was now the quiet force building the case that could bring it all down. I walked into my apartment that night and pinned a new printout to the wall. In the center, Jordan's name. Around him, circles, vendors, payments, people. A mind map of quiet fraud. Of a man who thought shadows could last forever. He didn't just fire me. He removed the only person who might have cared enough to notice. And that's when I finally understood. He hadn't just fired me for being too traditional. He'd fired me because I was in the way. He didn't recognize my name on the acquisition paperwork. Or maybe he did and refused to believe it. Either way, when I stepped into that glass-paneled conference room, cool air humming from the vents, leather chairs lined around a long walnut table, Jordan looked up from his folder and everything stopped. He was mid-sentence, laughing with one of his junior partners, but as soon as his eyes landed on me, the laugh died. His mouth stayed half open, like the words had simply evaporated. The blood drained from his face. That smug shine he always wore around people with power? Gone. All I did was walk in, shake a few hands, take my seat across from him without a single glance longer than needed. "Good to see you again," I said quietly, extending a hand. "Mr. Keats." His fingers twitched before they moved. He stood slowly, eyes darting like he was trying to do the math in his head. He took my hand, but his grip was limp, almost cold. "Daniel?" I wasn't aware. "You weren't?" I cut in, not harshly, just cleanly. My tone was calm, professional. "Let's begin, shall we?" The room stayed frozen for a breath too long. Then my associate, Jeremy, a younger executive with sharp eyes and a talent for timing, cleared his throat and started the meeting. The papers came out. The numbers hit the table. And just like that, we were off, slides on the monitor, asset breakdowns, charts of performance. But the real performance was Jordan himself. He kept glancing at me, not accusingly, just trying to make sense of the pieces. I could almost hear his thoughts crawling across the table. Why is he here? How did this happen? I let him drown in those questions. I didn't need to explain. Not anymore. 3 months earlier, I had started at Farrington Bell as a consultant. Small title, big reach. They knew my history, respected my reputation, and wanted my insight on acquisitions. I said yes, not because I needed the money, but because I knew where it could lead. My name still carried weight in the right circles, even if Jordan thought I was old-fashioned. That's what he'd said when he let me go. "You're too traditional, Daniel. The industry's moved on." Funny thing about tradition, it never really goes out of style, especially when people start craving stability. At Farrington, I didn't make waves. I made suggestions, quiet, strategic ones. In meetings, I listened more than I spoke. I noted every opportunity where Dax and Holt had left cracks in their market position. And there were many. Jordan had taken on risky clients, overextended his legal team, flirted with shady tax strategies that smelled like desperation. It was all there in plain view once you knew where to look. And I knew. I never tried to destroy Daxon. I didn't have to. I just waited for gravity to finish what arrogance had started. By the time our board approved the list of target firms, Dax and Holt was ranked second. I nudged it to the top. Quietly, gently, Jeremy and I met with analysts, pulled numbers, highlighted inefficiencies, framed the acquisition as an opportunity for revitalization. The perfect narrative. Jordan was drowning and we were offering a lifeboat, with terms, of course. Now, across the table, Jordan sat hunched. His suit, once perfectly fitted, had a slight sag at the shoulders. His voice, when he tried to ask about valuation, cracked just slightly. I thought this was going to be more of a merger," he muttered. Jeremy responded smoothly. "Technically, yes, on paper, but operationally, we're looking at a full absorption. It's cleaner that way." Jordan's eyes flicked to mine, begging for some explanation, some flicker of sympathy. I gave him none. Instead, I turned a page in the contract and pointed to the transition clause. Standard restructuring. Upon acquisition, the current executive board will step down to allow for a clean slate. There's a generous compensation package. Jordan blinked. He reread the sentence. Then again. "So, I'm out." I looked at him directly then, my voice soft but final. "You signed the future the day you fired me. This is just the paperwork catching up." He didn't argue. There was nothing left to argue. The rest of the meeting passed in quiet horror for him. For me, it was peaceful. I had walked the slow road step by step, never rushing. I'd done everything the way I always had. Methodical, respectful, smart. They called it traditional like it was a flaw. But the world turns back to tradition when the flashier things fail. After the signatures, I stood and offered my hand again. He didn't take it this time. He just sat there, shoulders collapsed, staring at the empty spot on the page where his power used to live. Outside, I stepped into the sunlight. The city looked no different than it had a year ago, but everything in me had shifted. I didn't gloat, didn't smirk. I just breathed deeper. You don't always need to fight for revenge. Sometimes you just need to wait for the right room and walk in. And I watched him walk out of the boardroom with the same stunned silence I had felt months earlier. Poetic, really. The elevator doors slid open with a soft ding, and I stepped onto the 32nd floor.
No ceremony.
No crowd waiting. Just the hushed, rhythmic hum of an office trying to remember what stability felt like. I walked past the same framed artwork Jordan had hung, past the reception desk that now had a different nameplate, and into the hallway I once called home. The glass walls had always made the office feel too exposed. Jordan loved that. He liked to be seen, to look busy, important. But as I walked through, I noticed how the light cut across the conference table now. Sharp and honest, like the truth finally had room to breathe. I didn't change the logo, didn't fire the men he brought in. I let the machinery hum the way it wanted to. My job wasn't to announce a new era. It was to restore what had been lost. Quietly, intentionally. "Morning, sir," said one of the junior analysts as I passed. The kid straightened in his chair, clearly nervous. I stopped. "Morning," I replied with a calm nod. "What are you working on?" "Cross-regional forecast modeling. For the Larson account." He looked barely 23, tie a little too tight, eyes eager. I glanced at the monitor. It was messy, but he had the right instincts. Jordan would have ignored him. I didn't. "Send me what you have before lunch," I said. "I'll take a look." His eyes widened. "Really?" "I mean, yes, absolutely." I gave a nod and moved on. The real work wasn't in replacing people. It was in repositioning them, reconnecting the right minds. I spent that week meeting every department, not in boardrooms but at their own tables. I asked them what had been working, what hadn't. I didn't lecture. I listened. And with every suggestion, every concern, I made quiet adjustments. There was something healing about it. Men who had stopped speaking to each other under Jordan's reign began laughing again over spreadsheets. Projects that had been stuck in limbo were moving again. The engine of the company, once sputtering and bloated, began to breathe. A few good men who had left during the worst of it took my calls. I kept the tone humble. "I won't promise perfection," I said to Thomas, one of our top strategists who left during the second round of restructuring. "Just an honest seat at the table again." He returned the next week. I never brought up Jordan. Not once. Not in interviews, not in calls, not even in private sidebars where I knew no ears were listening. I didn't need to. His decisions spoke for themselves. The audit reports rolled in by the second quarter. Missing documentation, overvalued assets, unexplained bonuses. He'd operated like no one was watching. But now everyone was. The client meetings changed tone. Not dramatic, just colder, more careful. One account manager muttered during a call, "Well, at least someone finally cleaned house." I didn't correct him. It was the silence that did the most damage. Jordan didn't issue a press release, didn't do a farewell video. He simply vanished. Within weeks, his name was gone from advisory panels, alumni groups, digital footprints. All that remained were whispers about the empty warehouse lease, about jobs that never existed, about a man who got too comfortable cutting corners. One of the interns, a lanky, wide-eyed kid with glasses too big for his face, approached me one morning in the break room. He held his coffee like it was some kind of courage boost. "Sir, if you don't mind me asking, how did you end up back here? In charge? I mean," I stirred my coffee and glanced out the window. "By being exactly who I was the day they let me go." He blinked, unsure if it was an answer or a riddle. But I didn't explain. He would understand it eventually. Maybe after his first real setback. Maybe after losing something that felt like the end. I'd learned the value of quiet persistence. Of walking forward even when no one was watching. It was that persistence that led me to the parking lot one crisp morning. Months later. The air felt the same. Cool. Still. I stood by the same car I had walked to the day Jordan forced me out. The difference now wasn't in the sky or the wind. It was in the weight I no longer carried. I took a breath. Long, steady. I wasn't angry anymore. The need to prove something, to shout my worth from the rooftops, had faded. In its place was clarity. Clean, patient, unshakable. I had rebuilt the thing that nearly broke me. Not with rage, but with resolve. I hadn't exposed Jordan. I hadn't embarrassed him. I had simply lasted longer. And when the board officially named me as the permanent CEO, I didn't throw a celebration. I took the keys, walked into the office, sat down. That afternoon, I received a photo from an old colleague. It was a screenshot from a niche industry forum. Jordan's profile grayed out, deleted. His final comment had no replies, just digital dust. And I realized then, this was the kind of justice that left no blood, but all the marks. Because justice, when it finally lands, doesn't need to shout. It just needs to arrive. And when it did, his face went blank when I became his replacement. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores themes of professional evolution, underestimated talent, and poetic justice in the workplace. This narrative aims to inspire resilience, challenge assumptions about what traditional means, and highlight the unexpected turns a career path can take.